birth of the Lich Bard. The Bard sat around the campfire laughing with his four most trusted friends. The stalwart warrior, a being so strong he could cleave a 20-foot tall tree down in 3 swings with an axe most men couldn't even lift off the ground. The devout cleric, a man touched by God and driven to help the suffering and heal any being who is in need without accepting any form of compensation. The noble paladin, righteous and just, fair and good. Oh, they rarely saw eye to eye, but always held each other in high regard and shared a mutual respect. And by far the most talented mage in this realm or the next. Had the Bard not seen his incredible feats in person, it would be impossible to believe. The ale had run dry and the band had grown weary, so they retired to their respective tents. This night felt different than their last adventure. Their revelry lacked the hopeful optimism of the adventures to come, and an unspoken sense of the end of the road ahead. The years have been kind to us, he thought, as he rested in his bedroll. Our luck may have been pushed more than was healthy, but we managed. How we made it out of Sigil, I have no idea. The Bard closed his eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Suddenly he was lifted from the mortal plane and was brought before Corellin Larinthian himself, the god of magic, music, arts, crafts, poetry, and warfare. He stood before the Bard in full splendor, radiant with elven beauty. I have watched you since your birth, young Bard. From your boyhood years to your first song to this final quest completed, and you have pleased me. Your skills have grown, and it is time for you to join me in my pantheon as my herald and demigod. Final quest, but there is still so much more life ahead of me, of all of us. It's not my time. But it is, young Bard. Your time on the material plane has come to an end. Am I dead? He asked. Dead? This is not the realm of death, young Bard. I have brought your physical form into my plane of existence. Then send me back. Back? You dare refuse your god? The radiant light surrounding Corellin darkened and grew menacing. I offer you one last chance to join me. If you refuse, you will lose all boons I have granted you throughout your years and adventures. Join me, young Bard, or you will be forever alone. The Bard simply smiled his smile. I've always had a problem with authority. Corellin grew to an enormous height. Towering higher than a redwood, he lifted the Bard roughly into the air and raised him to eye level. Begone! He roared, in deafening proportion, before throwing the Bard out of his plane. The Bard woke up, gasping for air, as if trapped below in an immense boulder. Just a dream, he thought. He dressed quickly and went to his companions. You would not believe the tree. He stopped short. He expected to see his companions around the fire, but there was no one, and the fire was just a smoldering pile of white ash. He rushed to the mage's tent, tore open the flap, and he saw to his shock that it was empty. He hurriedly checked the paladin's tent. Empty. The cleric's. Empty. And then he heard it. Whimpering. Soft, moaning sobs coming from the tent of the warrior. He rushed to the tent, tore open the flap, and saw him. The warrior, once a giant, now reduced to tears of insanity, frail and weak. "I saw him," the warrior moaned, between howls of pain and tears. The horrible realization came into sharp focus. They had all been visited during the night. They had all been offered seats in the Pantheon. They had all been given the chance to be the right hand of God. The paladin, so eager to please his deity, would have accepted without question, as would have the cleric and the mage who always hungered for more knowledge. Only two refused. The bard staggered backward, fell to his knees in front of the warmth of the ashes, and prayed. He prayed harder and was more genuine than he had ever been in his 22 years of life. He heard nothing back. Wave after wave of fear and dread pulled the bard into the depths of sorrow. How can this be true? He prayed to every god he knew the name of. The only sound he heard back was the sobbing of his fallen warrior. After some time he built a fire and stared deeply into the flames, trying to shield his mind from the cries and screams of his former brother. Hours passed. Every thought led back to the same conclusion. Spirals of pain within his mind. The warrior's cries of anguish echoed and punctuated his thoughts. Soon night fell, and the bard laid next to his only companion and held him, trying in vain to heal his fractured mind. Minutes dragged like hours. The bard tried everything he could think of to soothe his broken friend, to no avail. His frustration grew, but the answer came to him as if a door was opened. The bard pulled the thin pillow from under their heads and stood looking down at his friend. He thought of the years they had spent together, their adventures, their talks of family and home. He laid the pillow across his friend's face and held it down with all his might until the sound of his sobbing had finally stopped. He expected his own tears to start falling, but as he stared into the fire, he felt nothing. They left me. They all left me here. My friends, my brothers. I have nothing left, he thought. The next morning, he made his way back to the last town they passed through. By early evening, he arrived at the Dog Day Sunrise Inn. "Hey there, I remember you. You played some songs here 3 days ago. Really livened up the place. Hey, you got any more in you?" the bartender asked with a cheery smile. "Sure," the bard said grimly, hiding his pain behind his practiced smile. And he played all night, but his songs lacked the hypnotic charm that had his coin purse overflowing and his drinks coming as soon as his tankard was empty. "Not bad, friend. You kept them drinking all night. I could get used to that kind of business if you're looking for..." "No." The bard cut him off. He snatched the coin purse from the bartender's hand and then left, slamming the door. The next day, he booked passage on a ship and traveled across the sea. He took a new name and headed for the nearest inn. Days turned to weeks, weeks into months. His anger and resentment grew into seething rage that was hidden behind his charismatic smile. He took to liquor and snuff. He took to thievery, and one terrible night, he took the life of a drunk who made fun of one of his songs. He fled into the night, easily hiding from the city guard until he was sure he was safe. He felt nothing. No guilt, no sorrow, nothing. The next day, he fled to the next town. Months turned into years, years into decades. He went on a few adventures when the money was good enough, until he discovered an ancient arcane tome. As his fingers touched the old leather cover, a voice spoke to him from the void. The first contact with the outer plane ever since he woke into his waking nightmare. His excitement was almost too much to hide from his employers, and for days the invisible voice whispered its will into the mind of the bard, until there was no longer a way to reject its promises. That night, as the party slept, he slit their throats in their bedrolls. He took the heavy book and studied its pages for days, over and over, until he understood every aspect of the ritual. Coated in the blood of his former allies, he turned his simple lute into his first phylactery. His flesh burned with pain unimaginable. His eyes boiled away. He screamed with pain and horror until his mortal body burned to cinders and he was reborn as a lich. Hidden away in the mountains, his powers grew. Communing with the void for over a century until he could conjure a mortal form over his skeletal one, he reflected on his former bardic knowledge, remembering the power of influence over men. And further his powers grew. He buried his lute within his mountain hideaway, and he returned to the world of the mortals, almost completely disguised, although his evil aura could never be hidden.